Strong language now coming under fire from the arresting officer himself.
I think it's disappointing that he waded into what should be a local issue and something that is really that plays out here.
And from this online police forum, one person posted, "That drivel is okay for pundits and message board posters, but in my opinion, it was highly irresponsible for the POTUS, President of the United States." Another read, "POTUS should have stayed out of this."
I probably would not have used that choice of words. But the issue is not so much the verbiage. The issue is the fundamentals.
Hubert Williams is president of the nonprofit Police Foundation. After years of working to combat racial profiling, improve policing, and knock down negative perceptions, the police incident is problematic.
We've got to find better ways to address the perceptions of our officers and how they would function under some of these circumstances where they're dealing with different people from different races, different religions, different genders.
President Obama's comments, he says, at least puts the spotlight on this important issue.
We got a duty and a responsibility to address these issues before they blow up in our face.
Now, it is unusual for President Obama to tackle a race-related question so sharply, but in this case, he felt compelled to speak out on a situation where spokesman Robert Gibbs says a cooler head should have prevailed. Now, Gibbs did appear to be walking back or dialing back this situation just a bit by saying that the president was not calling the police officers stupid, but instead was pointing out a situation that really had gotten out of hand. Wolf?
All right, Dan, thanks very much. Dan Lothian, our White House correspondent. Let's continue the conversation now with Georgetown University professor Michael Eric Dyson and Mansfield Frazier. He's a contributor for the dailybeast.com. Gentlemen, thanks very much for coming in. Mansfield, I read your piece on the Daily Beast this morning, the headline being "Skip," and that's the nickname of Professor Gates. You mouthed off. Before we get to all of that, do you think the president was right in saying the police officer acted stupidly?
Well, if you want to talk about stupidity, in a situation like that, there's usually enough stupidity to go around. I think it was a poor choice of words. I think there were other words that could have been better. I think he might have acted unfairly, but I don't think it was stupid on his part at all. I think it might have been calculated on his part when he did arrest Professor Gates. But stupid, no, it wasn't.
But should the president have used that word? That's the question that I'm asking you, Mansfield.
No, I don't think he should have used that. It's a pejorative term. It was an incendiary situation. I think he probably regrets using it. But no, and I don't think it was a stupid act on the policeman's part.
Yeah, because he made the point, Michael Eric Dyson, that he didn't have all the facts. He also said he was biased because he's friends with Professor Gates. But then, you know, he could have ended it. He said, is there a problem of racial profiling in the country? Sure there is. He didn't necessarily have to prejudge the behavior of the police officer. That's the criticism that the president is facing right now. What do you think, Michael?
Well, I don't think it was prejudging the situation. Mr. Frazier is one of the great writers in American society right now, especially on politics and culture, and I hesitate to in one sense, oppose his viewpoint, but I think here that the president didn't say that the policeman was stupid. He said he was acting stupidly. Number two, he didn't prejudge the man. He said, in light of the fact that the ostensible reason for the search of Mr. Gates's home, Professor Gates's home, was that there was a breaking and entering charge. When it became clear that the person who was occupying the house was indeed the owner, or at least the occupant of that house renting it, then that should have been it. He should have gone his merry way. He should have said, look, we had this report. We had to check it out. Everything's fine. What happened is that Professor Gates, according to his side of the story, asked for the officer's ID and badge. He didn't get it. He followed him out on the porch, at which time the officer arrested him or had him arrested. So I'm saying that I think that the president is saying that's a stupid act when you have gone to the house to determine if there's breaking and entering, and what you end up doing is arresting a man on what appears to be rather suspicious charges of being loud and intemperate.
But Mansfield, you wrote this provocative piece on the Daily Beast today, the headline, "Skip, You Mouthed Off," in which you made the point that young black kids are taught at an early age by their parents, you know what, if the police come over, don't do anything provocative, don't say anything negative, just do what they're saying, and that Professor Gates didn't adhere to those ground rules.
Well, you know, what you want young people to do when they encounter a police officer police officer is to live to tell the tale, survive the encounter. And Professor Gates survived the encounter. He's a grown man. And you got to realize he was in his own domicile. He was in his home. A man's home is his castle. I can understand him being very upset because you had an invader. He had a badge and gun, but you have an armed invader in your home. So I can understand you being upset about that. And I think he got agitated. I think Professor Gates, rightly or wrongly, felt that he was being targeted because he was black. I think he felt that had he been white, he would not have gotten the same treatment. And that very well may be the case. We have a long history of police looking at blacks differently than whites. And I think that's what he felt was going on. Now, if you feel that, call for a senior officer, tell me, get me a lieutenant or a captain here because I think you're treating me badly. But one thing you don't do, and when he followed him out onto the porch, there were other officers out there. You really don't front off a police officer in front of other officers. That officer was probably put in position, if he didn't arrest Professor Gates, the other officers would have, man, you let that guy go all up over you and you didn't do anything about it. Well, you have to respect the badge, if not necessarily the person.
Michael, here's what Professor Gates told Soledad O'Brien last night. I'll play the little clip for you.
It was the fault of a policeman who couldn't stand a black man standing up for his rights right in his face. And that's what I did. And I would do the same thing exactly again.
All right, go ahead and weigh in.
Well, here's the thing. What he's alluding to is the uppity Negro syndrome, the intolerance of the police to countenance the daring of a black man to speak his mind. Mr. Frazier is absolutely right. We teach our kids to act in a certain way because they're not Professor Gates. They don't have the pedigree of Harvard. Right. They don't have the substance and symbol of that august institution standing over them. But the reality here is that why should black people have to tell their kids that? I have been in the presence of many white people when stopped by the police. They have cussed them out. I would never even begin to imagine what that might feel like. Imagine if the Harvard professor was Henry Kissinger, not Henry Louis Gates. Imagine George Bush was the president saying, this is my friend. Imagine a black sergeant on the police force then arresting Henry Kissinger. I tell you, that would be a different set of circumstances. There would be a different set of perceptions. Until white people are routinely harassed, harmed, and sometimes murdered by police people who act in, I think, unconscionable ways, we won't understand the reflex action of African-American people to the fact that here, even Skip Gates, a mild-mannered man by any construal of the facts, a man who has toed the line, a man who has not been a rabble-rouser, he himself was subject to the most vicious forms in his mind, and I think in the minds of many others, of recrimination by a policeman who couldn't stand the fact that he was articulate and perhaps being uppity. That's what Skip was referring to, and I think we have to figure that in as well, Wolf, in terms of how we look at the relationships between police people and African-American people.
Mansfield, what's the most important lesson you've learned from this incident?
Well, it's a lesson I've already known. I have to totally agree with Professor Dyson. Black folks should be treated, and until we do solve that problem, the one lesson I've learned, a whole lot has changed, a whole lot hasn't. I firmly believe that Professor Gates thought that, and on good evidence, that he was being treated differently than a white person would. That still goes on in America. It's still unfair. And I think we have to start looking at police officers more closely after they've been on the job for a while. Are they treating people fairly? But I still say what we need to teach our young people, survive the encounter. Don't do what Professor Gates did. You could wind up being hurt. If you're not in Cambridge, if you're not Professor Gates, and you mouth off to a police officer, you could wind up beaten, locked up, or even dead. It's happened to us.
And hence, and that's the bottom line here. I think, if I can add very quickly, the point is we want to get to a point in society where all human beings of whatever stripe, hue, or color are treated the way Professor Gates should have been treated, and they have the recourse of both public sentiment and the law to defend them. We're not demonizing cops. We're sure that Sergeant Crowley is a good, upstanding man. But at that particular point, he was engaged in a sort of behavior that was, I think, potentially offensive, should it turn out to be the case that what Professor Gates said is right. And in that light, we've got to interrogate the practices of police, how they're trained. Police people don't grow up on Mars. They grow up with the same sentiments, passions, prejudices, and biases that the rest of society has. We must understand that.
Michael Eric Dyson and Mansfield Frazier, guys, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Part 2 of CNN's Black in America airs later tonight. It looks at some of the most challenging issues facing African Americans. You won't want to miss the second installment. It airs tonight beginning at 8 p.m. Eastern only here on CNN.